welcome. You're watching NewsX with me, Devika Devan. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is set to arrive in Evian, France for the 52nd G7 summit, where India will participate as a special invited nation amid a rapidly evolving global landscape. The build-up to the summit has been dominated by the US-Iran peace framework, efforts to stabilize the Strait of Hormuz, and considers concerns over global energy security. All eyes will be on the expected Modi-Trump bilateral, with trade, tariffs, energy cooperation, H-1B visas and regional security high on the agenda. PM Modi is also expected to hold talks with French President Emmanuel Macron, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni and other world leaders. Accompanying the Prime Minister are senior diplomatic and security officials, including External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar and NSA Ajit Doval and Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri. The summit itself will focus on global economic imbalances, artificial intelligence, supply chains, critical minerals, Ukraine, debt distress in the developing world, and the future of the global south, an agenda India is expected to shape forcefully. But what is our actual expectation from this? Some breaking news coming in. US President Donald Trump has arrived in France for the G7 summit. That's the latest that we're getting. Visuals on your screens of Donald Trump landing in Evian, France for the G7 summit. This is, of course, remember, days ahead of what Trump calls will be a historic deal with Iran to put an end, a temporary end to the war in the Middle East, demanding a 60-day ceasefire. Ambassador Veena Sikri, former diplomat with us, Dr. Ajay Dua, senior economist, and Major General J.K. Bansal, defense expert with us as well. Let me begin this conversation with Ambassador Veena Sikri. Ambassador Sikri, beyond what's really on the written agenda of the G7, it's happening at a time when one would expect that if global leaders are being put in the same territory, they won't just be discussing artificial intelligence and other such matters, but there will be some serious talks, ma'am, about the situation in the Middle East and how that's really shaping the world. Your thoughts, Ambassador Sikri, on what really truly will be on the agenda of the G7?
I think this is a very important G7 meeting, and certainly the conflicts in the world, both the Ukraine-Russia conflict, because as you know, President Zelensky is also there, and certainly the Iran-USA MOU that is expected to be signed on Friday. It was to be signed yesterday, but that didn't happen. That also will be a big topic of discussion. And I think that India's presence there is very significant. It is for our Prime Minister the 7th consecutive G7 summit that he's attending. We do know that at the last G7 summit in Canada, President Trump had to leave early from Canada and return to Washington DC. So his meeting scheduled with Prime Minister Modi could not take place. And after that, there had been a telephone call, etc. There was a little bit of uncertainty about all of that. So this time, while President Trump, the White House has announced the meeting between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi, from our side, there has been no announcement of that. But certainly, Prime Minister's key meetings with other leaders is there. I think India is going to be very keenly interested in the discussion on the likely conclusion of the MOU. It's still not firm. I think there's still a lot of question marks. Likely conclusion of the MOU between Iran and USA. India has suffered. We lost 3 seamen with the attacks, the missile attacks on the commercial vessels carrying a large number of Indian seamen. And we know that even the International Maritime Organization in London put out a statement saying that it is most important that the safety of commercial vessels, the safety of seamen on commercial vessels, and the freedom of sea lanes of communication should be maintained at all times. So I think this whole question of the Strait of Hormuz remaining an international free waterway is under a huge question mark right now, because the very best that they're going to come up with is that Iran and Oman will manage or administer the Strait of Hormuz. Now, there may not be a toll, but there will certainly be some kind of service fee. So this unique change in the question of free and open international waterways is going to impact countries like India a lot, and India is already looking at a great diversification of its purchase of energy supplies. We have gone into Venezuela and Guyana, renewing the supplies from Venezuela, and now we have 41 countries. We're also looking at very interesting agreements with the UAE. When our Prime Minister was in the UAE on his last visit abroad, a very important aspect of maintaining strategic oil reserves in the UAE at Fujairah has come up. And also with Oman, there's a revival of the pipeline discussion between Oman and India. So, India is looking very seriously at diversification of its availability of oil supplies to maintain its energy security. And we're not going to be dependent, I think, on just the huge dependence we had before on the Strait of Hormuz, where 50% of our supplies were coming from there. We are also looking at sea lanes of communication, the Chennai-Vladivostok maritime corridor, extending it to Murmansk in North Russia, and then going up to the Nordic Sea, because our Prime Minister was in Norway, and we had discussions, India is an observer at the Nordic Council as well. We had discussions on the use of the Arctic for navigability, which is now happening for larger portions of the year. So, we have a great interest in this issue, and we are going to be participating. I'm sure our Prime Minister's speech will look at that. We also know that on cyber security and on AI, there's a likelihood, which is the news coming out of the AVR discussions, is that the draft statement of the G7, their own statement, is likely to focus on this, on the threat that the AI poses to the financial sector and to many other aspects. We know that the Pope himself has opined against a dependency on AI. So I think that this is something we're going to be discussing in a big way. But the economic role, India is going to carry the voice of the global south when it speaks for the aspirations of the global south, for the economic development, and for the way in which these aspirations have been adversely impacted by the strife, whether between Russia and Ukraine or between, and certainly now in West Asia. So I do think that our Prime Minister is carrying a very important message. We saw today when our Prime Minister was in Slovakia, the speech which the Prime Minister of the Slovak Republic made, and the way in which he lauded India's role as speaking for the lesser developed countries, as speaking for the global south, and its recognition on this count worldwide. So I think that India's presence, as put by the French, described by the French as a top priority partner, has been reinforced, and we are looking forward to Prime Minister's statement at the summit.
Right, absolutely. Dr. Ajay Dua, bringing you into the conversation as well, sir. I want to understand from your perspective, what do you think will be the big agenda points as far as the G7 is concerned?
My friend Veena has already said everything that there was to say about it. Veena, well done. Coming back now to the subject, I think at the G7 list, on the list are 3 agenda items only. Number 1 is the Middle East war, second is the Ukraine-Russia war, and third is AI. And the attendees are the 7 rich countries supported by EU, which doesn't have an EU status as a nation but as a bloc, and the rest are the invitees of the host country. That includes President Zelensky, and that includes Prime Minister Modi. For India, what it says at the G7 will be certainly heard, but we are invitees there. Let's keep that in mind. For us, it is important to be able to and this is the 8th time our Prime Minister, as Ambassador Sikri mentioned, 7 times he has already attended in the past, and this is the 8th time that he's gone there as an invitee. What happens on the sidelines are equally important as what is going to be happening at the G7 per se. I think if the meeting with President Trump does materialize, it will be first face-to-face meeting in 16 months. The last one being in February 25 in Washington, soon after President Trump's second term had started. And since then, we've had a visit to appease India. And it was no more than that when Rubio, the Secretary of State, spent 3 days in India just a few days ago. But the context you should remember, the context was the President of the United States had not got out of the visit to China what he had expected. If anything, he had gone back chastened because President Xi Jinping actually set the agenda, had talked about wider things, and no deal was struck there. So soon thereafter, the Secretary of State was dispatched to India saying, go and talk to them. But I think we dealt with it very well. If you would recall, we did not go overboard saying he's a representative of the President of the United States. We dealt with him as any others, and we do hope he probably heard us, we heard him, but there was no deal, no pact, no virtually a communique also issued at the end of the visit. So what I'm just trying to say, important as all these meetings are, the G7 also, even though we might be an invitee, but we do represent, one, ourselves, the fastest growing economy, large economy. We also are a voice of G20, the southern hemisphere, the global south or whatever we call it nowadays. But at the same time, we should keep that this as the visit was also not just a mere G7 visit, but the visit was to France. The visit of three city tour. Yesterday, it was in Nice, where the Bharat Innovates was inaugurated by the two heads of the government. Very useful. Thereafter, a bilateral lasting 90 odd minutes. Very useful between France and India. And now he's come to the second place, and tomorrow he goes to a third place in France, where President Macron and he would talk again. And I'm expecting that the joint statement, which will get issued tomorrow at the end of the third day in France, would be fairly consequential. We might end up not merely about defense manufacturing in India, be it extensions of getting the fifth generation fighter aircraft, also made with Rafale part in India, but also on nuclear energy. Now that, you see, France is one country which has huge amount of electricity being generated from its nuclear plants. Actually, probably the highest nuclear plants for civilian use are in France. France and India could not do much in this field because of the usual limitations, particularly about the liability limitation. Now that we have the Shanti Act in position, I'm sure the problems of SMR, the small modular reactors, we could end up with an understanding achieved in that direction, in defense as well as technology. And I will stop by just explaining that yesterday, we are not talking about R&D being done in India or India becoming a very big R&D base. We are talking of technology which has been invented elsewhere, being made its application. The word used was technology adopter. That Indian startups, 150 of them were represented yesterday, that they are all capable of acting as the disseminators and making use of the technology for which research has been done, how to go about it and make it useful for the mankind in general.
Okay, as we speak, Major J.K. Bansal, I want to bring you in on this as well. We're now learning from reports that are coming in, important developments taking place as the world prepares for the G7. A senior US official has now stated, sir, that the US has signed the MOU with Iran, that Donald Trump and JD Vance have signed the MOU, and so has the Iranian parliamentary speaker. The deal provides for immediate opening of the Strait of Hormuz and lifting of the US blockade on Iran.
Yes, this is a very good news, and it will give relief to many countries and specifically throughout the world, because 20% of the energy supply is through the Strait of Hormuz. And of course, it was a very long awaited. So let us see if it stands for quite some time. That will be the good thing, because the major issue of the nuclear program or the nuclear enrichment of Iran is not, I think, being considered so far. But hopefully it will come to, because now the Iran is facing a lot of economic pressures, and now Iran has come to the conclusion that they will stop this program. So this is a very good development, and India welcome this, and the whole world will welcome this kind of move. And as far as the G7 is concerned, the one thing I would like to tell here, of course, India is not the member of G7 countries, but India has been consecutively invited for 8 times earlier. Up in the 52 years of G7 summit, the India was only invited, I think, 14 times, and out of that 7 and 8th time consecutively, that means the India's voice matter over there, and India tells, and India is talking about the global south, as well as India is emphasizing about the restructuring of the UNSC and the World, WTO, World Trade Organizations, and what should be for the this emerging economies. That is one of the things. And as far as the meeting with President Trump is concerned, of course, after February 25 in Canada, there was a meeting to be supposed to be, but it could not happen. After that, after February 25, there had been certain things, as President Trump has been claiming mediation of Pak-Indo war, but there was nothing of that sort. Secondly, they're putting a extra tariff, because we were buying the oil from Russia. Now, since then, there had been a lot of development, and which is to the positive side. The Macron has visited India, and this Marco Rubio, and at the same time, India was also invited to Paxilica. The second round, the final round of trade talk has also been there. Or now there is a possibility that yes, in the month of July it will be finalized. So India is a very important strategic partner for US, and US knows it very well. And as far as the point of 3 Indians who were killed by American attack on commercial vehicle, this was condemned by President Trump in one of the press conference, and he mentioned about it that it cannot be tolerated. So he realized that this was the wrong thing. And this point will be very strongly put by our delegation, a particular meeting which is going to be held between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi. So this meeting, and one important thing, that there's a bilateral talk with, of course, France will be there, and this TAC VO, which will be attended by Prime Minister Modi, and Prime Minister Modi will be talking to certain other countries' heads, like Venezuela, like this Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, Egypt, Kenya, South Korea. So this will be very, very important meeting, and India is an emerging economy, and everybody listens to India, because India is also emphasizing that in the conflicting situation of the world, as it is happening in Middle East as well as in Ukraine and Russia, that everything should be sorted out by the dialogue and diplomacy. This has been time and again mentioned by Prime Minister Modi at various stages and at various meetings, that there is no solution by war. Has to be dialogue and diplomacy. So, like that, our Prime Minister is well respected by all the leaders, and this meeting will be very, very important, as has been told about the artificial intelligence, what should be the rules and regulations. That is also very, very important. These points are going to be discussed
Okay.
during this meeting. Yes.